The first step is always just to start checking in with yourself and realize that it's like when you're a child and it's about those monsters under the bed that you feared, and that essentially it actually is less scary once you take a look under your bed. It's never as bad as you thought it was going to be. And so start getting into that habit of just asking yourself, what was I thinking just before this? That's really the first and most major tip that I have for people, is that when you notice a feeling you don't like, when you notice a behavior that you did that you wish you didn't, just ask yourself, what was the thought that I had just before this? And when you ask yourself that, you're going to start seeing certain patterns emerge. That maybe it's always a thought that catastrophizes the future. That maybe it's a type of black and white thinking where if you make a mistake, you're like, well, I've blown this entire goal. But you're going to notice that there's certain themes to your thoughts. And once you know what those themes are, then you can address it head on.
I'm Doug Bopst, personal trainer, best-selling author, and entrepreneur, and I'm on a mission to help others become the best version of themselves. So I'd like to welcome you to the Adversity Advantage podcast, where we will help you use obstacles, failures, and setbacks to give you that edge needed for success. I'll be interviewing people from all walks of life on how they overcame trials and turned them into triumphs. So please sit back, relax, and get ready to be absolutely blown away by some of the wisdom and stories you're about to hear. Welcome back to another episode of the Adversity Advantage. I'm your host, Doug Bopst, and today on the show, we are talking about self-sabotage. And this is something that clearly can destroy our own life as well as others if not handled properly. And self-sabotage can be as simple as not making the choices which we know will help us or that are not aligned with who we want to become. And other examples of self-sabotage include giving up on a fitness journey too soon, not asking someone you like out on a date, or being too afraid to start that side hustle, project, or new career that you've dreamt about. More obvious forms of self-sabotage include making decisions you know can make your life worse, like doing drugs, drinking excessively, staying in toxic relationships, not showing up for work or school, or repetitive negative self-talk. Watching someone you love and care about self-sabotage can be heartbreaking. And we've all seen ourselves doing self-sabotaging behavior as well. And you might be asking yourself, why do we do this and how can we stop? After today's episode, you will certainly have these questions answered. Dr. Judy Ho joins me on the show today. She is a triple board certified and licensed clinical and forensic neuropsychologist and a tenured associate professor at Pepperdine University. She is also an author, most recently penning Stop Self-Sabotage, a book detailing a scientifically driven 6-step program to stop self-sabotage. We will take a deep dive into all things self-sabotage, including the 4 reasons that you do it and the exact steps you must take to understand, unwind, and stop it in its tracks. We will also discuss the close relationship between self-sabotage and procrastination and so much more. So let's get this conversation going and welcome Dr. Judy Ho to the Adversity Advantage podcast. Judy, welcome to the podcast.
Oh my goodness. It's so much fun to be with you. Thank you for having me.
Of course. And I'm excited to really take a deep dive into the topics of self-sabotage, procrastination, imposter syndrome, like feeling like you're not enough when you're trying to achieve your goals. But first, I want to ask, what inspired you to write an entire book on self-sabotage? I mean, I guess I was thinking about it before we recorded, and I was like, can you really write a whole book on that? But you definitely did. You did it well. Was it something that you experienced in your own life? Was it something that you saw in your clients? Was it something that you just saw as a trend in the profession or something that was going on in the world around you? Like, what was the thing that really got the ball rolling for you to put a lot of time, energy, and work into a book like that?
Well, thanks, Doug. I mean, for me, I felt like it was something that everybody had experienced at some point in their life. Yeah. Now, for some people, it's not a pattern that is pervasive. You kind of get over it, or maybe it's just occasional, but everybody is familiar with the concept of self-sabotage. People use it in their common language. They talk to each other about it. But a lot of times people then don't do anything about it. They'll say, well, I sabotage that, or I self-sabotage that. And then they kind of just move on. Oh, well. And I felt like people really needed a scientific toolbox for how to deal with this problem once and for all. And everybody's self-sabotage could be a bit different. Some people self-sabotage because they procrastinate. Sometimes people self-sabotage their health goals, maybe their career aspirations, maybe their relationships. But there's always an area where maybe this is rearing its ugly head for people. And that's why I wanted to really put something together to help address this problem in a more comprehensive way.
Yeah, I mean, because it's easy to see when someone else is self-sabotaging, right? It's easy to look at the person who's in that bad relationship with the person that's treating them like crap or not conducive with the life they want to live. Or when you see the person that's just struggling with drugs or struggling making poor decisions that are not aligned with the person they want to be. And you're like, gosh, I just wish they could just see it like I see it, but really they can't, right? And so if that's true, then obviously there's plenty of things in our own lives that we're self-sabotaging, if you will, that are having direct and indirect effects in different areas of our lives that we're not even aware of. So I guess to start off, I want to get into the definition of self-sabotage, but do you think that self-sabotage happens more subconsciously or consciously? Like, do you think people are just purposely like, you know what, like I'm not going to get there anyway, I'll just quit, or I'll just procrastinate on this because I'm not going to get it done anyway? Or do you think it's just something where it's wired in their brain from childhood, trauma, past relationships, that sort of thing?
Well, I think for different people, it's different reasons, but I think backing up to why self-sabotage does touch every single human being at some point in their lives, it's because essentially it is part of our biology. It's part of our evolutionary perspectives. And what I mean by that is all human beings have two primary drives and two primary drives only. It's to obtain reward and to avoid threat. That's how we can ensure our individual and our group survival. And generally, when those two things are in balance, then everything's going great and you're able to make progress on your goals. You can thrive, you can do well. But over time, either because of experiences, personality traits, and other types of factors, which I know we'll delve into later, which I've termed LIFE as an acronym to remember the four major factors. Over time, people start to sometimes amplify this idea of avoiding threat in their minds. And now, even though we're not running away from the saber-toothed tiger so much, the emotional threat is presenting just as much of a fear response as a physical threat. We haven't really learned to distinguish between them as human beings. And actually, we don't really need to, because now we know that there's so much research that if you're being emotionally threatened, it's also going to affect your physiology. It's going to affect your physical health. And so essentially, it starts to provoke a type of a fight or flight or freeze response. And you end up starting to hold yourself back because you're thinking so much more about the avoiding threat piece that you almost start to de-emphasize the attaining rewards piece. So those two things are not in balance, and certain things can throw that switch into action.
Yeah, I mean, it's spot on. I've seen that a lot in my own life with just simple things, whether it was asking a girl out, or maybe it was like running that first mile, or it was my first public speech, or whatever it was. It was like the same fear response as if I was getting ready to die, right? So a lot of what you just said made sense. And I think I heard you say, it was in another interview, that you ask people when you're working through self-sabotage to ask them, are they going to die from doing this thing? And if the answer, obviously, well, like I would say 99% of the time is no, right? I'm sure obviously you've worked with some people that maybe were suicidal and that sort of thing. I'm talking about, though, the majority of people that come to you when they're fearful of making a decision or a choice. And it's like, okay, I'm not going to die from this. So that threat's out the window. There's no saber-toothed tiger coming to get me. Like, how do I move forward? Am I right by that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that sometimes it's really hard to convince yourself that just because you have a certain feeling that has provoked a certain fear response, that it's actually not dangerous, because people think, well, if I'm feeling this or I'm thinking this, and it must be true. And a lot of times it's not. And we don't have to beat ourselves up about it. In fact, it's sort of like your brain trying to do its best to protect you. But it's like that overprotective mother or father or uncle or teacher who's like, don't do that. And it's like, okay, it's probably going to be fine if I do it, but they're just a little overly protective. And I say that because we have to have some self-compassion when that happens to us. It's obviously not because we want ourselves to fail. It's just that your brain is just a little overcharged and trying to keep you from harm. But a certain level of risk-taking is important to get to any important goals that we have for ourselves.
Yeah, 100%. And I think the better you get at taking risks, not necessarily always having success, because you're not going to always achieve everything, the better you get at taking more risks in the future, because you're like, oh, it wasn't so bad. I'm not going to die. I'm not going to get severely hurt. The worst thing that happens is maybe somebody rejects me, or maybe I don't get as fast of a time as I thought, or maybe I didn't get the job I want, but at least I'm still living and I'm able to keep moving forward. And I want to stay on this a little bit before we go deeper into self-sabotage, because I think it's important, because I would say most people, when they're making a decision that scares them, they know that they're not going to die. But I think what happens is once they get past that moment, like they're like, all right, I'm going to go to the gym for the first time, or I'm going to go ask this person out, or I'm going to get out of this relationship, whatever it is. their mind takes over or their body takes over or both. A lot of people will experience these panic-like sensations in their body. Their heart will race, they'll start sweating, they'll start shaking, or the mind will just go a mile or a million miles a minute and they just can't even control their thoughts. So what do you tell somebody when they're in that moment, when they've established the fact that they're not going to die from whatever choice they're going to make? Like, how do they move through that next phase so they can continue along the journey of like achieving what they want?
Well, part of this is that when we start to veer away from something that we're fearing, but we know is actually not going to have a true negative impact on us in terms of our livelihoods or even our emotional health, that when we start to veer away in that moment, it actually ends up reinforcing that cycle. And I like to give this very, I think, relatable example where somebody has a little bit of social anxiety. They know that they have this get together they have to do with new people they've never met. They're feeling anxious as they're leading up to it. And at the height of their anxiety, they call the host and make an excuse. Sorry, I can't be there because blah, blah, blah. I'm sick. Something came up. Well, when somebody does that in that moment, you get that immediate flood of relief. Like, oh, good. Now I don't have to deal with all of that uncomfortable stuff. I don't have to deal with my own social anxieties. But unfortunately, it reinforces a cycle because it does feel so good temporarily. So that the next time this comes up again and you allow yourself to have that response again, you end up reinforcing that type of avoidance coping over and over again. So the key of this, which is scientifically based, is that you have to find some way to ride through that anxiety. And so much of this is anticipatory anxiety. Once you actually show up, it's never as bad as you thought it was, but you just don't allow yourself to go there. So whatever it takes you in that moment, whether it's deep breathing, whether it's distracting yourself, all of these different techniques that you can do, you have to ride it past the crest of the wave of that anxiety. And then once you do, you feel so much better and more efficacious about the next time you have to confront something like this. Well, I did it before and I survived. You have to give yourself that evidence that, okay, I remember the last time I did this and it actually turned out okay.
Yeah, you're so right. Because you got to create a new normal, right? Like if you're so used to not taking chances on yourself and always being scared and then turning away from whatever you want to try to, better your life, you're going to be used to that. And that's just going to be a pattern. It's going to show up in your relationships, it's going to show up in your professional life, it's going to show up in how you treat yourself, it's going to show up in your home and all these places. But the same can be true if you go the opposite way and you're like, all right, I'm going to take chances on myself. It's going to be scary. It's going to be fearful. It's going to be hard. I'm going to be anxious, but I'm going to accept it and ride it through, not only because it gives me a chance to get what I want, but I'm going to evolve as a much wiser, stronger, and better version of myself. And I'm going to create a new normal. So I think the biggest first step in doing this is developing self-awareness around the self-sabotage and why you're doing these patterns. And I know that you alluded to a few minutes ago, this acronym LIFE, which helps people unpack like where and how they're self-sabotaging in different areas of their life. So walk the listeners, if you can, through that acronym step by step, and why you picked each one of the words for each letter.
Definitely, Doug. Well, everybody's factors for why their self-sabotage trigger is activated is different. And so the part of your brain that becomes overprotective is activated for different reasons. And that's why I created this acronym called LIFE, because I think that captures essentially everybody's experience in one way or another. You might find that only one out of those four factors applies to you, or maybe all four, or maybe some other combination. But I think that this covers the gamut of why people end up throwing on that overprotective trigger in their minds. The first letter is L, and L stands for low or shaky self-esteem. And we know that self-esteem can occur in different areas of life. You might have very good athletic self-esteem, but not so good career self-esteem. Or you have great relationship self-esteem, but not so great healthy lifestyle, eating, self-esteem, right? Everybody's self-esteem is different in the different areas of life. You might find that your trigger for overprotectiveness gets more activated in the area in which you kind of don't believe in yourself that much. You haven't really gotten enough evidence throughout your life that things work out in this domain. And that's where your overprotective switch can go on. I stands for internalized beliefs. These are things from childhood that you learn from important adults like parents or teachers or even really older siblings on how to navigate life. And so if you had extremely overprotective and anxious parents, maybe that their overprotectiveness was annoying when you were a kid. And then as you become an adult, you realize that you've adopted some of their beliefs for yourself and that you're starting to maybe look a little bit too far before you leap. And those types of things can really have an impact on us because as children, we're learning how the world works. So even if you've had multiple other experiences later that might actually go against what you learned as a child, your mind is imprinted a lot of times more significantly with those earlier experiences because that was your first encounter on what you should be doing in the world. The third factor is F for fear of change or the unknown. Now, we know that all human beings don't love the unknown and we don't love change. And that makes sense. That's protective from an evolutionary perspective. But some personalities, they can take risks a little bit easier and have less anxiety, whereas some other personalities, they really don't like change. Even one thing changes in their schedule and they're like, oh, like they get so irritated. And then this fear of the unknown. I don't know how this is going to turn out. So I almost rather just stick to what I know. And I've had clients who have said to me, yeah, I do think that I want a better job. I want a different career, but I have this good situation. It's not great, but at least it's what I know. And there's definitely that feeling that can plague people that leads them to self-sabotage. And then E is for excessive need for control. So these are people who are my perfectionists, my type A individuals. And I say this with love because I feel like I'm a type A individual. But sometimes when you have that more excessive need for control, it's a little harder for you to get involved in certain things where you might not be able to control every step of the way. And as a result, you actually end up holding yourself back in some ways. And actually, when people procrastinate, I've tried to educate people that it's not usually because you're lazy. You're procrastinating because you have all of these ideas about how you want to do it right. And you don't want to start the process until you can do it right. But then before you know it, you ran out of time. And that's where the self-sabotage happens.
Wow. I think it's incredible that you put those 4 factors and combine them in the acronym LIFE, because if you are able to control those things, it'll impact your life positively. And if you don't control them, it'll impact your life negatively. And I think that there's people that are listening that can relate to each one of these factors, but they're like, all right, well, what's a specific example that maybe this could relate to what I'm going through? So if you could provide the listeners with maybe like just one example, like a real life example, either you've experienced or you see a lot with your clients that represents each one of these factors. We will get you back to this episode of The Adversity Advantage in just 1 second, but first, I want to let you know this podcast is brought to you by Athletic Greens. If you're anything like me, you have a lot going on, and it can be challenging at times to maintain effective nutritional habits and give your body the nutrients it needs to thrive. This is where Athletic Greens really helps me. Their all-in-one superfood powder is nutrient-packed and is included in my daily smoothie without fail, or serves as a quick pick-me-up in between appointments and interviews. Personally, I have noticed that it helps with my digestion, energy, and immune system. One tasty scoop of Athletic Greens contains 75 vitamins, minerals, and whole food sourced ingredients, including a multivitamin, multi-mineral, probiotic, green superfood blend, and more. Plus, they are committed to helping people strengthen their immune systems. Athletic Greens is doubling down on supporting your immune system with everything going on in the world right now. This includes their offer for my listeners. They are offering my audience a free 1-year supply of vitamin D, which many people are deficient in, yet is crucial for immune system support. And they are also giving away 5 free travel packs with your first purchase if you visit my link today. You'll basically never have to buy vitamin D again. Simply visit athleticgreens.com/Doug and join health experts, athletes, and health-conscious go-getters around the world who make a daily commitment to their health every day. Again, simply visit athleticgreens.com/Doug and get your free year supply of vitamin D and 5 free travel packs today. Now back to the show.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, with the first factor, which is the low or shaky self-esteem, I can see this sometimes happening when somebody is trying to effectively move towards positivity in an area of their life where they just didn't have a lot of success in the past. So for example, not believing that they actually have good health and exercise related self-esteem. Like they just never thought of themselves as an athlete. They really didn't think that they could do these things. And so every time they put those goals for themselves on the table, that particular self-esteem shakiness leads them to self-sabotage more because there's a part of them that doesn't believe they can really do it. And in essence, that negative cycle then continues because then, of course, you don't get the evidence that you actually can do it. And then they just sort of have this belief about themselves like, well, I'm just not that person. I'm just not the person that exercises regularly. I've never been able to do it. And I just have to accept that. Right. So that's one example. Where
and as a trainer, I see that a lot with people who have their New Year's resolutions and they stop like so soon because they're like, I'm never going to be able to lose 50 pounds. I'm never going to be able to lose 60 pounds. I'm never going to be able to do that set of 30 push-ups. And that's why I always encourage people to start small. Like focus on one push-up, focus on just getting to the gym like once. Like, stop setting these incredibly high expectations for yourself, because you're bound to fail. If you're somebody who hasn't gone to the gym for 20 years, of course, it's going to feel incredibly intimidating to go 5 days a week. Just start small. So go on. I just wanted to throw that in as a relevant example, just as in my profession as well.
And I'm so glad that you brought that up, because I know that this in your expertise, that people make these New Year resolutions and maybe by February it's gone. Like they have like the motivations drop. They again have received this data, a little bit of their own doing, that I can't do this, so I don't even know why I bother trying. But also there's that very black and white thinking about their goals. And this especially is a case with New Year resolutions, where it's like, well, I missed one day this week, I might as well just throw the whole thing out because I ruined it. It's like, you didn't ruin it because you missed one day. Just get right back on the next day. It's all good. But sometimes it's hard for people to understand that there's these gradients, and it takes time. It takes weeks before you establish a real positive habit that really then feels automatic to you. So I stands for, of course, as we mentioned, the internalized beliefs. And I think that sometimes you've perhaps even watched your parents struggle with something and reinforce certain beliefs on themselves. And now you're taking that to heart. I recently just worked with a patient who both of her parents are obese. And I think watching them wrestle with their weight and go on different diets, and then like they inevitably gain that weight back. As an adult, she's inherited the same type of problem. And she kind of believes, well, this is, I guess, just the way that my family works. It's my genetics. It's how we are. I've never seen my parents succeed, so how can I succeed? And those internal beliefs that she took from her childhood, which I'm sure her parents had no idea they were imprinting that on her, has really caused her to have a number of health issues in her current life and then feel inefficacious about it. So then whenever she goes to her doctor, her narrative with her doctor, who says you need to lose weight for your health benefits, she tells the doctor, well, but my whole family is obese. Like, it's just impossible for me. So just tell me what I can do to mitigate where I'm at now, as opposed to I can do it. I can improve my health indices instead of just putting a Band-Aid on it.
Yeah, I mean, that makes total sense, because I believe that our environment can create a false sense of normalcy. Right. So if you're spending time with people, whether that's your family or friends, and they're constantly telling you you're not good enough, or they're constantly eating poorly, or they're constantly not exercising, they're doing drugs, and go on, you're going to think that's just how it is. And you're like, oh, it's just the way it is. It's the way I'm going to be. It's the way I was born. It's my genetics. And they forget that if they're just able to just change not only their behaviors, but their surroundings, and spend time with people that are aligned with where they want to go instead of where they were, that things can really change for the best. I'm so glad you brought that up. So go on.
Yes. And I think that that belief in your own self-efficacy, that there are changes you can make at any time, no matter where you started, that's an important belief to instill upon people, because sometimes they really haven't made contact with that in so long that they don't believe it's possible. So, and then F for fear of change or the unknown, I think that this can happen for people who are very risk adverse in general. They'd rather do the thing that feels safe than the thing that makes them step outside of their comfort zone, because that anxiety is too great for certain types of personalities. And where I see this a lot is people who maybe have been in the same jobs and it's just a means to an end. They don't get a lot of pleasure out of it. And even though they have skill sets and they could push themselves more, they don't. And again, that then becomes part of their narrative. Like, well, I mean, nobody's supposed to like their job. It's a job for a reason. So I'll just do what I have to do. And they don't realize that over time, it actually, in essence, could wreck your own self-esteem, that maybe you don't deserve better because you look at your life, you look at your behaviors, it's not producing results. And it actually feeds back on itself. Like, well, what does that mean about me? And it can actually cause them to feel a loss of efficacy, not only in an area that impacts their career, but maybe in other areas too, where they're looking for positive change.
I agree. And I think that, people tend to change when their pain of their current situation becomes greater than the fear of the change in itself. And I think so many people, they wait till the last minute. What ends up happening is they don't make that change, and they're in the emergency room with a heart attack. They haven't worked on their relationship or their marriage, and now they're getting divorced, or they've overdosed on drugs. So they haven't gotten help for their addiction. I can go on and on with these examples, but I think there's a lot to be said. And for people listening to this to know that fear of what can come after you make a change for the better is better than you staying in the same place and being miserable with who you are. And I think people really need to think about that. Like, how happy are you with your current situation? How happy are you with your current health? How happy are you with your current relationship? Because yes, it's definitely fearful. It's definitely scary of the unknown of what happens when you go into the gym for the first time. It's definitely fearful and scary of what happens when you leave that relationship. But how scary is it going to be if you've gained 100 pounds in the next 2 or 3 years from not taking action, and now you have diabetes, or you just had a heart attack, or you were in this relationship and now maybe you have kids, and now the relationship's gotten even more toxic, and now divorce is on the way. And now there's so many things that can go wrong as a result of you not embracing the fear. So embracing fear, embracing change is a good thing as long as you're doing things that are aligned with the person that you want to be, in my opinion.
And I think that is such great advice and a great way to look at it, because what we know is that sometimes people will be kind of leaning into that adage, the devil. It's like, well, but at least I know how to deal with this. It's not ideal, but I've coped with this before. I've coped with this less than ideal marriage. I've coped with this job, even if I don't like it. But what if I actually take a leap and I fail, or I take the leap and I try to separate from my spouse and I never find a better relationship. And this was really the best that I could get. And that is what sometimes holds people in place as opposed to moving forward. But we're always having to move forward as human beings. We're never really stagnant or static, but it can be hard to convince your mind of that and to really allay yourself of those fears and say, it's actually better to take that chance. I think that is understandable why some people struggle with that. But the last one, as in terms of excessive need for control, this is a very common thing that I've seen with people who are actually extremely effective at certain parts of their life. I mean, they may be really disciplined athletes. They may be Fortune 500 CEOs, and they're used to having everything controlled in their life, and it's led to amazing results. So it's hard to let go of that. And where the area I see for these individuals where it rears its ugly head the most is things that they can't control completely. And that is romantic relationships, because no matter what you do, there's this other person involved with their own issues and their own preferences, their own interests and values. And no matter what, even if you think you're doing all the right things, they may not love you back. They may not always do the right thing. And I've seen people who, again, are very efficient at multiple areas of their life. And with romantic relationships, because they can't let go of that control, it's led to relationships not working out. Or they may just decide that they're not even going to take a leap in the first place because they know that there's going to be this aspect that they can't have control over. So they'll just say, well, I'm not really the person who wants a long-term partner anyway. It's not important to me. Like, I'll date here and there, but I don't really need to have those longer-term relationships. And sometimes I'll see these individuals say that they want good relationships, but then whenever they go and date somebody, after a couple dates, they're talking about all these things that really don't matter, that isn't going to make the relationship work out. And that's them trying to establish control over that situation.
Yeah, you see it all the time, right? And I think people do it subconsciously, and they're not even aware of it. That's just who they are because of the patterns they developed based on a lot of these other factors. I think these four factors are all intertwined. Like, I think low self-esteem, low self-image, low self-worth can come from like how you grew up, like the I think it can come from fear, right? Because I think if you are continually not doing the things, not taking the chance and doing the things that you should be doing to better yourself, you're gonna feel like crap because you're like, man, I knew I should do that. I know I should do that, but you just don't. Right. Yeah. And then when it comes to the E, if you have low self-worth and low self-esteem, you're going to want to try to control everything because you're just so caught up in fear of the unknown. And you just are that if you take it, you think that if you take any chance that it's going to fail. And then I just see it all being intertwined. I think so many people struggle with every single one of these, especially relationships. And I think procrastination is probably the biggest byproduct of self-sabotage. Procrastination and not getting into a relationship, procrastination and not taking the job you want, procrastination and not writing that book, procrastination and not losing the weight. I mean, I can go on and on with examples of things that people procrastinate on. And by the way, that I've procrastinated on because I'm like, all right, is it going to be perfect? Am I going to make it? Am I good enough? I mean, I procrastinated on doing this podcast for a couple of years because I was like, there's so many podcasts, right? Lack of self-worth, right? Am I going to be able to have success, control, fear of the unknown? Am I good enough? Can I communicate with people? Am I going to be able to have conversations with people like yourself who have way more experience in the educational department or in the education space and that sort of thing? And the truth is, like, you just got to do it. So, but I know there's a scientific way that you've come up with. It's a process for people to kind of unwind this self-sabotage knot in their life and kind of rewire it in a way that's going to set them up not only for success, but to be able to develop self-awareness when they're experiencing it to kind of get them out of the rut moving forward. So can we get into that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. I think rewiring our brain is always something that's possible no matter what age you are. I've gotten a lot of questions about that. Well, I'm already 40, I'm already 50. Can I really make changes if this has been so ingrained in most of my life? And the point is, yes, you can. You can always make changes. And that's why it's so important that we really educate ourselves on the neuroplasticity of the brain, even into our older ages. Yes, of course, when you're 70, your brain is a little less plastic than you were when you were 50 or 40 or 20, but you can always make change. You can always create new pathways in terms of how your brain communicates and how it responds to certain triggers in your life and how you manage those triggers. And so I think the idea of trying to walk back some of this is really, first of all, becoming more aware of your thoughts. People don't realize that they're self-sabotaging sometimes because they're just not aware. They're not having enough mindfulness to their internal dialogue. And yet that internal dialogue is wreaking havoc on them every day, and they don't realize it because that dialogue has been so ingrained, it's repetitive, that your brain starts to ignore it consciously because you have so many other things you have to deal with in a given day that your brain is not going to consciously acknowledge and recognize and register the same self-defeating thoughts to you unless you start paying attention to it. And yet, even without that conscious recognition, it can still affect how you feel. It can affect your behaviors, and it can loop back onto itself as a secondary thought that is self-defeating. And so the first step is always just to start checking in with yourself and realize that it's like when you're a child and it's about those monsters under the bed that you feared, and that essentially it actually is less scary once you take a look under your bed. It's never as bad as you thought it was going to be. And so start getting into that habit of just asking yourself, what was I thinking just before this? That's really the first and most major tip that I have for people is that when you notice a feeling you don't like, when you notice a behavior that you did that you wish you didn't, just ask yourself, what was the thought that I had just before this? And when you ask yourself that, you're going to start seeing certain patterns emerge. That maybe it's always a thought that catastrophizes the future. That maybe it's a type of black and white thinking where if you make a mistake, you're like, well, I've blown this entire goal. But you're going to notice that there's certain themes to your thoughts. And once you know what those themes are, then you can address it head on.
I love you that you brought up the thoughts because, and I've heard you talk about this before, I think your thoughts can either encourage you or destroy you, right? Because your thoughts become your words become your actions, and your actions develop into who you are as a person. And then that obviously translates into who you are as a parent, who you are as a boss, who you are as a spouse, and go on and on with examples. So I think that first step in developing self-awareness around the thought process is incredibly important for those listening. Like, I think you're going to really want to do this, like check in with yourself. And when you're making these choices or having these experiences, like what thought predicated that? Was it, I suck? Was it, I'm not good enough? Was it, this isn't going to work out? And then write that down. And then, I mean, in my experience, when you write this stuff down, you look at it and is there truth? No. It's not true. Like, would you really tell yourself things like that? No, of course not. But I think what happens, Judy, in my experience, you can correct me if I'm wrong, is if we were to talk to our best friend the way we talk to ourselves sometimes with our thoughts, we wouldn't have any friends. We would be a loner. Right. Because some of the stuff we say, like, you suck, you're not good enough, you're ugly, you're overweight, like all these things. Like, can you imagine saying that to your husband? Can you imagine saying that to your best friend all the time? Like, you'd be by yourself all the time. So I'm glad you brought up the thought thing, because if people can get just one thing from today outside of obviously the LIFE acronym and self-sabotage, like learning to really be aware of your thoughts and control them in a way that's conducive with where you want to go, and making sure you're talking to yourself in not just a positive way, but a loving way where you're not only lifting yourself up, but you're holding yourself accountable and saying, you know what, you told yourself you were going to get to the gym, get to the gym. You told yourself you're going to call your mom, and so on and so forth.
Right. And I totally love the way that you're putting that, because I think that you're right. One of my techniques is like, how would your friend talk to you if you were in this situation and your friend was asking you, what would you do if this happened to me? Or what would you do if I had this thought about myself? I mean, you clearly would not talk to them the way that you talk to yourself, but we do it to ourselves all the time for a couple of reasons. I mean, one, maybe we sometimes don't believe that we really deserve good things, and that can come from that lower shaky self-esteem or internalized beliefs from childhood. But sometimes we think that awkwardly, it's supposed to be motivational for us to beat ourselves up. And it actually doesn't work that way. Self-compassion is much more of a motivational factor than beating yourself up. And that's why so many people will say, well, but that's something that I use to like amp myself up. It's like, it actually doesn't work that well, given the research. If you have more self-compassion, it actually gives you more motivation, because it's like, well, I can make a mistake and I'm still a good person, and I can still do something else that's positive for myself, even if today I didn't get to the types of goals that I was hoping to get to. And I think that that's a switch for a lot of people. They don't realize that the drill sergeant in their heads is actually not a helpful factor. And also, they sometimes don't realize that our thoughts have such a degree of impact on how we feel and then how we behave afterwards. That's really the basic tenet of cognitive behavioral therapy, that our thoughts drive our feelings and our actions. And it all starts with your thoughts and the way that you talk to yourself. So if you can rewire your brain to talk to yourself in a more balanced way, that's where the change starts. It's not about just positive affirmations all day long, because that's also not realistic, but it's more about recognizing the difference between this is a thought that I'm having versus this is a reality. So one of the techniques that I teach people is this technique called the yes, but technique, which is like, yes, acknowledge something that didn't go so well, but acknowledge your efforts at trying to change it for the better. So one example might be, yes, I was hoping to exercise 5 days a week and I didn't accomplish that this week. But for the last couple of weeks, I have been exercising more than I ever have before. And I know I'll get there.
Cool. Yeah, I was waiting to see where you went with that, because what my follow-up question was going to be, if you said, yes, I didn't get to the gym today, but I'll go tomorrow. And if they do that for like 5 days in a row, like, what do you tell somebody? Because at some point, like, because I think what happens is people are black and white. It's either I'm going to be a drill sergeant on myself and I'm going to be like, you better go to the gym. You better get there. You better get there. You suck if you don't, blah, 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 blah. Like you said, like the whole like drill sergeant mentality, or the other side where it's like, it's okay. We'll just do it tomorrow. It's okay. We'll do it tomorrow. And neither one work. And I've always said like the new skinny, and I made a post about this not too long ago. The new skinny is self-love combined with personal accountability. Like that's the new skinny to me. Like having compassion for yourself, but holding yourself accountable in a loving way. And that's what moves the needle forward, in my opinion.
Yes, exactly. It's that combination of self-compassion and still having accountability, having a plan to move forward. One of the things that I talk to people about, also another science-based technique, is once you understand what your triggers are, you understand why you have these barriers to completing a specific goal. It's important to then keep yourself accountable by creating these if-then statements in advance. So before you start feeling emotionally dysregulated, before you're already starting to beat yourself up in your head, if you know that a common trigger for you is that you keep telling yourself, I'm going to work out at the end of the day, that's when I can really focus on my workouts. But you know that every single time you're too tired to work out at the end of the day, you're going to have to start putting certain things in place in advance. Like, if I tell myself in the morning that I'm going to work out at the end of the day, then I will put on my tennis shoes and just go for a 20-minute walk. At least you've done that in the morning. That way, at the end of the day, if you never got to like the bigger workout that you planned, that you still did something really positive for your body that day.
And I love how you're integrating the other success metrics for health in this, because as a trainer, you see a lot with people, the only metric they use is the scale and how they look, or even strength goals. But they forget to see the fact that they have exercised more in the past month than they have in the past 3 years, that they do feel better, that their relationships are improving, that they do have a bigger smile on their face, that they are like starting to crack jokes, or they have that sense of humor, they have that swagger back they haven't had, so that when the scale doesn't move, like you're able to stay positive on the things that you have accomplished and not what you haven't. So you can keep that optimistic mindset to move through that plateau, if you will, and to continue on your journey of trying to lose weight or gain strength or whatever the goals are. So, all right, we got into step one, which was developing self-awareness around like the thoughts and what thoughts came before whatever action you took. What's step two?
Well, so we actually started talking about step 2 and 3 together, which is really understanding your behavioral patterns.
Gotcha.
And sometimes people don't realize what their triggers are for these self-sabotaging behaviors. And they just say, oh, well, I'm helpless. It just keeps happening to me. But there is a process. The thoughts happen, then the feelings and the behaviors, and then it loops back on itself. So what are those triggers, the most common things that tend to set you off? And it's not always what people think. Triggers are not, for example, just the thoughts in your head, the memories in your head, but they could be environmental cues. They could be the fact that whenever you walk into the workroom at your office and there's food there, even though you're not hungry, you just eat it. You just eat it because it's there. And there's some kind of weird belief in your head, like free food, and you just eat it, even though you're not hungry. It could be things like being stressed, feeling not very well that day and thinking, well, I'm just going to distract myself by eating a bunch of snacks and then feeling bad about it later. Whoops, I ate too many snacks. Now I feel too full. Okay, well then the day's blown. Let me just keep going with this and just keep binging on food. People don't realize that a lot of times these triggers are not just thoughts and memories, but they're also even certain people, what people say to you, how you feel. There's all of these different categories. And I think that that's important for everybody to recognize that you have to find out what those triggers are. And then you have to make these if-then plans for them. That you have to understand that once you identify those triggers, make an if-then plan for each of your common triggers. Write them down in advance. Don't wait until you're already emotionally dysregulated at 10 p.m. You're already stressed out. You're tired. You're not going to be making good decisions then. And you think, okay, I'm going to sit myself in front of the TV, watch Netflix, and just bring this whole bag of chips. 5 minutes later, you've eaten the whole bag.
So I guess the way I'm understanding it is it's you want to have a plan. Like you want to be able to pay attention to your past patterns, your past behaviors, and be able to write things down when you're in a state of consciousness and you're alert, so that you can be prepared for the night when you are having those cravings for the chips, or for the time that you want to be getting to the gym that you haven't been able to make it to the gym, or whatever the case may be, so that when you're in that state of dysregulation or you're panicking or you're stressed out, you're able to move through that in a way that's productive so that you can break the pattern, create a new habit, and reattach a different behavior to that emotion. Am I right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's why it's so important to start to really understand your patterns, not be afraid of them, because this is a tool where you can actually learn more about yourself and then develop a very specific set of skills and management techniques that's going to work for your particular set of triggers, thoughts, feelings that tend to come up at different situations. And the more you do that, the more empowered you feel, the more efficacious you feel. And that builds on itself too. So it's kind of like this idea of getting on a positive loop as opposed to that negative loop. Like the more you get this evidence that you can solve your own problems, that these things do contribute to forward moving progress, the more you're going to want to do it the next time.
Absolutely. And I like how you frame that. And I like how you are laying this foundation out step by step. Number one, develop a self-awareness on the thoughts. Number two, realize and identify what your triggers are. Then number three, create this if-then statement so that it can develop some accountability and some reward, if you will, to whatever behavior you're trying to change. All right. So we got 3 steps left. Let's get through these, which is step 4, step 5, step 6, because I would love the audience to be able to really take away not only the 4 factors that are rooted in their self-sabotage, but the step-by-step process to be able to get out of it efficiently.
Of course. Yeah. So a lot of what I spoke about earlier and what we just talked about in terms of changing behavioral patterns is what step 4 is all about. It's actually allowing yourself to do visualization in a way that actually not just visualizes the positives, but actually visualizes what's stopping you. Really taking the time to think about what are the costs. If I don't reach this goal, how would I feel? How would I feel about my life? How would I feel about myself? Really bringing that to fruition in your mind, even though that doesn't sound like such a pleasant activity. And that's why people all love positive visualizations, but they don't want to do this other piece of what are my barriers that are getting in the way. But once you understand your barriers, you can start to create these new routines and for your body and your mind to come together to actually essentially imprint new habits that make the most sense. And I think once you realize that visualization can be used in that very powerful way, and this is something that has been used by, again, very successful people in all realms of life for a long time, what you're doing is you're allowing yourself to have mental rehearsal in terms of how you actually overcome barriers in your mind. The more you rehearse it in your mind, it's actually making connections as if you were doing it in real time. That's what we see in research. And so allow yourself to practice getting over those obstacles and barriers like athletes do. And there's a lot of research that shows that when athletes are practicing running, practicing swimming, practicing whatever sport it is that they excel at in their minds, it's almost like real practice. The results are really tangible. And so that's really what step 4 is all about. And step 5 and 6 is really about living a values-based life. We're always chasing goals, but are they tethered to the things that are truly important to us? That's a really essential part of all of this. Where is your motivation and willpower coming from? Those things are not infinite. They're finite. And over the course of the day, as you get more and more disorganized and tired, the more you're going to have to essentially make tougher and tougher decisions to regulate yourself. But if you're able to think about the things that truly bring value in your life, and these are not things that you can check off, they're things like integrity, adventure, community, spirituality, and the like, the more you're going to be willing to do the hard things, even when the going gets tough, because you're thinking, well, there's a bigger purpose to all of this. And the last step is really wrapping it all up and creating a vision board that actually works. Vision boards are lovely, but without the specific routes on how to get there, it's really hard to know how you're going to actually roadmap your path to success. So mine is called the blueprint for change. And it actually is like the blueprint of the house, where you actually specifically list out everything we've been talking about, your life factors, your specific triggers, your if-thens, your top values, and how they relate to your primary goals. And that way, whenever you do find yourself being stuck, you have a visual tool where you can say, this part of the blueprint, this is what I should be doing now.
I love it. And I like how you kind of brought it all together with the most important things, which I think are values and your beliefs, and like having that vision board, because I think at the end of the day, like motivation will only get you so far. It's discipline, it's consistency, it's belief in yourself over time that will actually get you to a point where you're consistently setting and achieving the goals that will help you create a better version of yourself. So Judy, this has been awesome. I think the audience is going to get so much out of this episode as a masterclass on topics of self-sabotage, procrastination, and things that will really help people unpack some of the things that have been stopping them from succeeding, some of the things that have been stopping them from finding true happiness, and some of the things that have been stopping them from becoming a better person. So where can people find you if they want to check you out? I know you're on Instagram. I know you have a podcast, and obviously your book, Stop Self-Sabotage, is available on all the places where you can buy books, right?
Yes, absolutely. And thank you so much for this great interview, your thoughtful questions. Your listeners can find me on Instagram at Dr. Judy Ho. And you can also find out more information about me at drjudyho.com. Stop Self-Sabotage is available wherever books are sold, including Amazon. And my podcast is called Supercharge Life with Dr. Judy, where I give scientific and tangible tips to improve your life every day. So definitely check that out.
Stop self-sabotage. Say that 5 times fast. Anyway,
I know.
this has been wonderful. This has been great. I will be sure to plug all that stuff in the show notes. And I really appreciate your time. I know you're busy. And I think, again, people are going to get a lot out of this. And for those listening, one of the things that I always recommend is if this episode touched your heart and you really learned something on self-sabotage, procrastination, maybe it was something that you didn't realize you were doing in a relationship, whatever the case is, take a screenshot, tag myself, tag Judy, go buy her book, share your biggest takeaway or something that you're going to implement in your life to help you overcome self-sabotage. Maybe it was something from her life acronym. Maybe it was one of her 6 steps, whatever it was. Just make sure you tag us. We love hearing feedback. We once again, thank you for listening to this episode of The Adversity Advantage. I'm your host, Doug Bopst. We'll see you next time.